Many things can be inherited genetically. Looks, diseases, mannerisms, but murder? In the case of Ward Weaver III, it looks like murder might be a genetic trait. This is the story. Hello, I'm Sean, and if you're new here, then welcome to my channel. If you are returning, then welcome back. I love seeing you return. Twice a week, I research true crimes that I find interesting to tell you about. I want to make sure that the victims are remembered, and there are a lot of victims out there to remember. If you are not subscribed, please do so. It is free. I appreciate each and every one of you, and if you want to support me kindly, you can buy me a coffee. There's a link in the description. If you have any ideas for future crimes, please feel free to leave me a message or send me an email. So, on with today's true crime. Now, the last thing I said about sending me an email, today's true crime was suggested by a subscriber. I want to thank this person for suggesting it. This person is actually related to the story in some way, but I'm not going to say how or who the person is, if it's male or female or what. They know who they are. Thank you, and I appreciate you sharing the story with me. Yeah, I never heard of it until you told me about it. Also, I am warning you in advance, there might be triggering events during this. Some of the subjects include the R word or assaulting somebody in the sexual nature, and this does involve young teenagers. So, I don't always go into great detail, especially when it has to do with these two subjects. I kind of just glaze over it saying, oh, yeah, this happened, and then move on. So you don't have to worry about that. So let's start with today's true crime. Ward Francis Weaver III was born April 6, 1963 in Humboldt County, California. His parents were Trish and Ward Weaver Jr. In 1967, Jr. left the family. So when he was like 4 years old, his dad abandoned him. Trish then ended up marrying Bob Boudreaux, I think that's how you pronounce it, who turned out to be an abusive alcoholic. Bob would often beat Weaver with a belt, and this was his life, and they moved to Portland, Oregon. In his teenage years, Weaver started to exhibit antisocial behaviors. His sister Tammy stated that he had abused at least one family member, both physically and sexually, and this was before he even turned 12. His stepbrother, Robert Boudreaux, stated that Weaver would frequently beat him up when they were kids. In 1981, it was reported that he R-worded a teenage relative and beat the person up. This occurred multiple times, and it was reported to the police. But the Multnomah, if I'm saying that wrong, I'm sorry, county prosecutors felt that since Weaver was entering the armed services, they would not charge him. They felt that he was going to be leaving the Portland area, so the abuse would stop. Welcome to 1981. I mean, seriously, it's crazy that the prosecutors thought this way. Just because he's moved away, doesn't mean that. It's like, I don't know. They should have just still prosecuted him. So Weaver graduated high school right after this, and he joined the U.S. Navy Reserves. But he was discharged on May 17th, 1982 for dereliction of duty because of being a heavy drinker. He was barely in the Navy for a year. While he was there, he met his first wife, Maria Stout. She was from the Philippines, and after he was discharged, the two of them moved in with his parents. Soon, she became pregnant. This did not stop Weaver's abusive ways, though. In fact, he hospitalized his wife when she was 5 months pregnant after severely beating her. She, of course, refused to file any charges. His son Francis was born December of 1982, but Weaver didn't know that Francis was not his biological son. We will come back to that later. In 1981, Weaver Jr., so Weaver's dad, murdered an 18-year-old Air Force recruit, Robert Radford, and his girlfriend, Barbara Lavoie, who was 23. He also R-worded her. He was in Tehachapi, California. He took her and buried her in his backyard, and he was sentenced to death in 1984. Junior was also suspected to have possibly killed 24 other people, but it was never proven that I could tell. But they thought, since he is a truck driver, because where he attacked these people wasn't in California, it was a ways away. Left the boyfriend there, drove her back while he was doing unspeakable things, and then killed her and buried her in his backyard. In 1984, Weaver and Maria moved to Bakersfield, California. He was hoping to reconnect with his father, who was now in prison. He claimed that they caught up on a lot of the lost time by visitations and everything. I don't know. In August of 1984, he and Maria got married, and they soon had a second child, Alex. At the age of 23, Weaver was arrested on June 15th, 1986 in Fairfield, California. He had consumed 6 beers, 6 vodka screwdrivers, a little pot, and a gram of speed. He was in a van with a couple of young daughters of friends of his, and he was upset after fighting with his wife. They pulled over the van so he could use the restroom. Now, I don't know why, but for some odd reason, he took a chunk of concrete and hit the younger sister in the head and grabbed the 16-year-old and put her in a headlock, taking her to the floor. There was no reasons on why he did this stuff, but he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for the assaults. In January of 1988, he was released from prison and his family moved to Canby, Oregon. They opened up a store, and Maria gave birth to their 4th child, Mallory, in 1980. In 1993, Maria filed a restraining order against Weaver and ultimately ended their marriage. She was tired of the abuse. I guess a person can only take so much. Plus, Weaver was starting to sell cocaine and meth, and she didn't want to be a part of that. In July of 1995, he was jailed for beating his new 18-year-old girlfriend, Christy Sloan, beating her with a cast iron skillet, nonetheless. She refused to testify against him, so no charges were filed. It was later stated that she feared him so much, and that was the reason she wasn't going to testify against him. In October, they were back together, and in February of 1996, they got married. In August of 1997, Weaver started to have an affair with a woman that he met at work. They moved into a house at 2507 South Beaver Creek Road in Oregon City. His daughter Mallory lived with him, and she started to hang out with Ashley Pond and Miranda Gaddis. They were all members of the same school dance squad, and Mallory had sleepovers at her house often with these girls. I don't know what happened to Christy Sloan. There was some discrepancy in what I was reading because they got married in 1996 and they got divorced. They said, according to the thing that I was reading, they said that they got divorced like 4 years later. So that'd be 2000. But in 97 is when he met this married woman and started hanging out with her. So yeah, I'm confused about some of the timelines because they didn't. Two different things were showing two different timelines, and I couldn't piece together the exact thing. So I'm sorry if some of the timelines are off. In 1999, Weaver's son Francis shot into a truckload of teens, injuring one of them. He was charged with aggravated assault and placed in a juvenile detention center. In August of 2001, Ashley, one of his daughter's friends, accused Weaver of attempting to R-word her when she was at his home. Now remember, his daughter would have her friends come over for sleepovers. And I don't know why I said remember, because I just said that like a minute ago. It was reported to the police, but charges were not filed by law enforcement. I read that for a time that summer, Ashley actually had to live with the Weavers as there were issues with her own home life. It was said that Ashley was being assaulted by her father in the sexual way. So, she went from one abuser to another, and that is just terrible. This is an ongoing theme of assault throughout this story because apparently Miranda Gaddis, she was also assaulted in that way by her mother's boyfriend. So a lot of sick men throughout this whole story. On January 9th, 2002, Ashley, who was 12 at the time, left her home at the Newell Creek Village Apartments. I kept stumbling over that. To walk to the bus stop, but never arrived. Friends and family searched, but couldn't find her. The dance team, which all three girls, Ashley, Miranda, and Mallory, were members of, organized a fundraiser to help with the search. They actually scheduled this fundraiser for March 23rd, 2002. Now, this is a fundraiser that Miranda, who was 13 at the time, would never make it to because she went missing on March 8th. During the search for Ashley, they actually interviewed Miranda on a TV station, and then all of a sudden she went missing too. The FBI initiated a task force to search for the girls. They believe that the two cases were related. Well, they're both like best friends and they went missing. It has to be some related. I mean, it might not have been, but just a coincidence. I don't know. There was hopes that the girls might have just ran away, and that's what they hoped for, but they also feared the worst. Coincidentally, around the same time, Weaver and his son Francis dug a big hole in their backyard. Then Weaver covered it up with concrete and said he was going to make a pad for a hot tub. On July 3rd, 2002, Weaver invited the KATU TV news inside his home after raised allegations that he might have been involved. He stated that he was the FBI's #1 suspect in the disappearance of these girls, mainly because he knew the girls and had sleepovers at his home, is what he was saying. Part of the interview was on a cement slab in his backyard where he was going to install this jacuzzi. Interesting. In August, he told news crews that he had plans to move away from Oregon. Video actually captured him walking back into his home with his son's girlfriend. I think it was actually later that day, that evening, Francis contacted the Oregon City Police to report that Weaver R-worded his 19-year-old girlfriend. She escaped from the home practically naked, flagging down a motorist to be taken to safety. While Francis was telling the police about this, he decided to tell the police another thing. He stated that his dad confessed to him that he had killed the 2 missing girls. Weaver was arrested that day, mainly for the R word, but it gave the police a chance to investigate the other part. On August 14th, so the next day, Ashley's mother or stepmother placed a sign on the concrete slab stating, "Dig me up," as TV crews filmed this. She turned to one of the reporters and asked if they noticed a smell as they were walking up the pathway to the backyard. The reporter said, yeah, they noticed a smell. They weren't going to, go into detail about what they thought it was. So, like 9 days later, the FBI finally obtained a search warrant and sealed off the whole property. I don't know why it took 9 days for them to do all this, but on August 23rd, they sealed off the property and erected tents over the shed and a concrete slab. The next day, a medical examiner's van arrived at the scene. The reporter who interviewed Weaver just a month before broke down during a live broadcast. They had discovered Ashley's body in a cardboard box in the shed. Later, Miranda's body was discovered in an oil barrel under the slab. So when he was talking to the news people and standing on that slab, they were mere feet away from Miranda's body. And they walked by that shed too. So, I mean, that's how pompous this guy was, that he would talk about his innocence right there near the bodies. Yeah, sick individual. An interesting case of genetics, though, is in 1981, Weaver Jr. had his then 10-year-old son help him dig a hole in the backyard, stating that there was a broken sewer pipe. He covered the woman's body with concrete and built a wooden deck on top of this. Now, granted, this wasn't Weaver, but like his stepbrother or something like that. Now, 21 years later, Weaver mirrors what his own dad's action, like kind of a sick genetic twist. It's just weird that he did the same exact thing that his dad did. Was it nurture or nature that killed these girls? Weaver never really lived with Junior, after the age of 4. So how did he mimic these actions so clearly? Is there a murder gene? On October 2nd, 2002, Weaver was charged with 2 counts of murder, along with a number of counts for the R word and abuse in the sexual nature. In September of 2004, to avoid the death penalty, he plea bargained, admitting to 2 charges and no contest to the rest of them. He was sentenced to 2 life sentences with no chance of parole. During this trial, though, I found out that he was also convicted of uh, R-wording or assaulting sexually a 15-year-old girl, but there was no information about her. So, it was his son's girlfriend, Ashley, Miranda, and then some 15-year-old girl. So I don't know where she came into this. I didn't find anything else about her. On March 4th, 2007, while in the Snake River Corrections Institute, Weaver was walking to the barber shop when the barber, who was also an inmate, used a makeshift knife and started to attack him, causing neck and shoulder injuries. He was treated in the prison, and the barber was placed in a disciplinary unit. You always hear about how criminals like Weaver are the lowest of the low in prisons, and this is just an example of what can happen to them, I guess. Outside of the prison, Francis was having issues. He was acquitted of robbery and burglary, but he was found guilty of possessing marijuana with intent to sell. In November of 2005, Weaver's own son Alex, who was 20 at the time, pled guilty to felony attempted assault. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison, 3 years post-prison supervision. He had struck an 18-year-old with a rubber mallet in the head. In 2009, Miranda's younger sister, Mariah, went to visit Weaver in prison on 2 different occasions. She said that she had to know what happened. It was the only way that she'd be able to put this behind her. He admitted that he had killed both girls with his bare hands. And I guess even more chilling than that is that he told her that he had plans to kill her next, but she was too young at the time, so he needed to wait till she got a little older, and that's the only reason that she was still alive. What a piece of shit. I mean, seriously, this guy is just, Mariah is such a strong female for having to endure these visits. I could not imagine what she was going through, the fear, the anger, whatever. And I hope she's doing well. On February 17th, 2014, Francis Weaver was arrested and charged with murder. He and 3 others robbed and killed a 43-year-old Edward Spangler, who allegedly was a drug dealer. Francis was convicted of the murder in 2016, but it was later reduced to manslaughter. The other 3 were also convicted for their roles in the murder. At this time, Francis's mother finally revealed that Weaver was not his biological father. But it was already too late. He was already condemned with the Weaver name. His sentence was life in prison without parole. So just like his, I guess, stepdad, you know, so many lives were destroyed in this story. And I asked earlier if there's a murder gene. I looked it up. UCLA has a Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences and said that there is no such thing as a murder gene. Now, experts have argued that there's no single gene that can determine if a person will commit a crime or not, but there are traits that can possibly lead to a person's criminal behavior. Things like neuroticism or psychopathy or impulsivity or manipulation or a limited capacity for empathy. These can make a person susceptible to committing violent crimes. And these are traits that can be inherited from your parents. there are people out there who are carriers of these traits, and they will be more likely to develop violent behaviors. Most scientists would say that it's the environment that they grew up in that molded them to become what they are. And I used to be a big believer on that. But yeah, I'm sure genetics play a huge part in it. I've always wavered back and forth between nurture and nature. And in Weaver's case, Weaver Jr., it appears that nature, because of the genetic that he got from his dad, and some of those traits might have made him this way. He was only 4 when Junior left, so it couldn't have been nurture. His dad wasn't nurturing to him. I would definitely say nurture with Francis, though, because he was not genetically Weaver's. But, he watched the abuse. He watched all the sexual misconducts and stuff like that Weaver would do. And I think that probably imprinted on him to do it too. I'm not sure. Or he learned from watching. You can go back and forth with this subject, but unfortunately in this case, the facts still remain that a lot of lives were ruined. Ashley and Miranda lost their lives. They lost their futures. Who would they have been? What would they have done? These are things that we will never know because of one monster. To the friends and family of Ashley Pond and Miranda Gaddis, my heart goes out to you. I cannot imagine your pain. And I am so sorry that you had to go through this and not have your little girls grow up to be women. To my subscriber that suggested this story, I thank you. It was a real wild ride, and I hope I did it justice for you, your family, your friends, and everyone that's involved. It's kind of a tough one. So, thank you for watching. If you're not subscribed, please do so. As always, be good to yourself. Be good to others. I love you all. I will see you next time. Bye.